Have you ever felt overlooked? Have you ever wondered if God has truly called you? Let me tell you something. This is your confirmation. You are chosen. From the very beginning, God has called and chosen His people for a greater purpose. Throughout history, we see examples of individuals, Abraham, Moses, David, and the disciples, who were set apart to fulfill divine assignments. But what does it mean to be chosen by God? How do you recognize His calling in your own life? And once you do, how can you take the next step to walk fully in His guidance? Many believers struggle with these questions, feeling uncertain about their purpose or hesitant to embrace the path God has laid before them. Yet the Bible assures us that we are not chosen by accident. God has a plan for each of us, and stepping into that calling requires faith, obedience, and a willingness to surrender. Welcome back to Secrets of the Bible. Today we will explore what it truly means to be one of God's chosen people, and the signs that you are chosen by God, and practical steps to align your life with His purpose. If you ever felt a stirring in your heart that you were meant to something greater, this is your invitation. Take it and step into the next step with us, because you are chosen by God. You're not alone in that question. There was a young shepherd boy named David. No one expected much from him. He wasn't the strongest, the oldest, or the most obvious choice. When the prophet Samuel came looking for Israel's next king, David wasn't even invited to the lineup. His own family overlooked him, and yet God had already chosen him. See, to be chosen by God isn't about being the most qualified. It isn't about standing out to the world. It's about being set apart by Him. David understood this, and we see it in Psalm 139:14, when he says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." But let's pause here for a second. In Genesis 1:26, when God created mankind, He didn't say, "Let us fearfully and wonderfully make man." He said, "Let us make man in our image." So where did David get this revelation? David had come to understand something powerful. He wasn't just created, he was marked, set apart, chosen. The Hebrew word for fearfully is yari. It means to be honored, to be treated with reverence, to be marked for something sacred. In other words, David realized that he wasn't just another son, another shepherd, another face in the crowd. He was set apart by God for a purpose bigger than himself. And here's where this story turns toward you. You may not feel like the strongest. You may not be the most obvious choice. Maybe life has made you feel overlooked, like you're standing on the sidelines watching others step into their purpose. But what if I told you God has already chosen you? Not because of your qualifications, not because of what others see, but because He sees you. Because He has marked you, because He has set you apart. The question isn't whether you are chosen, the question is, will you recognize it? Will you embrace what God has already spoken over your life? Will you step into what He has already prepared for you? Because when you do, when you truly believe that you are chosen, everything about your life will begin to change. Let me break this down so you can truly understand what it means to be chosen by God. You see, being chosen doesn't start when you realize it. It doesn't start when people recognize your gifts or when opportunities open up. No, being chosen starts before you are even born. Jeremiah 1:05 declares, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." But think about this. Jeremiah was born long after the nations already existed. So why would God say, "I ordained you to be a prophet to the nations" before He was even formed? Because God doesn't wait for you to feel ready before He calls you. He doesn't wait for you to recognize your purpose before He prepares a place for you. God creates the platform before He reveals the calling. In other words, the very thing you are called to do, the impact you are meant to have, God has already set the stage for it. The opportunity, the assignment, the purpose. It was already in place before you even became aware of what was inside you. And here's the part many people miss. Being selected is not something you earn. God doesn't choose you because you're the smartest. He doesn't choose you because you're the most educated, the most talented, or the most qualified. He chooses you before you even know you're chosen. That's why when the time comes and you start sensing that there's something more inside you, when you start feeling that pull towards something greater, you're not stepping into chance. You're stepping into what was already prepared for you. But here's where things shift. To be chosen and to be called are not the same thing. Matthew 22:14 tells us, "Many are invited, but few are chosen." To be called means an invitation has gone out, but to be chosen means you've been set apart for something specific. And this is where Amos 7:14 NIV comes in. "I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I was a shepherd, and I also took care of sycamore fig trees." Amos didn't come from a line of prophets. He didn't have the background or the qualifications. But when God chooses you, He doesn't consult your past. He doesn't look at where you come from. He looks at where He's taking you. Let me take you deeper into what it truly means to be chosen by God. Because not everyone who is called is chosen, and not everyone who is chosen is called in the same way. Look at Amos. In Amos 7:14, he says, "I was not a prophet, neither was I the son of a prophet. I was a shepherd and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. But the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, 'Go, prophesy to my people Israel.'" Amos wasn't born a prophet. He wasn't raised in a prophetic lineage. He didn't have it naturally. He was called into it. God invited him into a purpose he had never seen coming. But the chosen ones, they are born into their purpose. They don't have to be made into it. No one trains them into being chosen. They are already who God intended them to be before the world even knows their name. Some of you are frustrated right now, not because you don't have the gift, but because you're in a season of preparation and mistaking it for a season of manifestation. Because the chosen don't become, they are. And it's only a matter of time before the world sees what God has already declared. Trials are not meant to break you, they are meant to build you. When God chooses you, He doesn't just call you, He refines you, He strengthens you, and He does it through fire, through storms, through battles. Not to destroy you, but to prepare you. Not to weaken you, but to mold you into something unstoppable. Look at Joseph. Joseph's journey didn't begin in a throne room, it began in a pit. He was betrayed by his own blood, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into a prison cell, forgotten by men. If anyone had a reason to believe God had abandoned him, it was Joseph. But here's the truth. God never abandons His own. Even in the pit, God was there. Even in slavery, God was working. Even in the prison, God was preparing the next move. Because when you are chosen, your faith will be tested. Your faith will walk through fire. Your faith will be thrown into deep waters. Your faith will stand trial before the forces of darkness. And in those moments when the weight of the world is pressing against you, when the enemy whispers that you are alone, know this: God does not send someone else. He comes Himself. That is the God we serve. He does not sit on the sidelines. He does not watch from a distance. He is the Almighty, the unshakable God. This is the God who stood with Moses and split the Red Sea in two, the God who walked into the great fish with Jonah and commanded it to obey, the God who stepped into the lion's den with Daniel and shut the mouths of beasts, the God who stood in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego until the flames lost their power, the God who spoke and the dead man Lazarus walked out of his tomb. This is our God, and He has not changed. Even today, He is stepping into impossible situations. He walks into bankrupt businesses and calls them back to life. He enters hospital rooms when doctors have given up and speaks healing. He restores broken homes and shattered marriages. He lifts up the lost, the rejected, the forgotten, and He makes them whole. So hear me now. Do not fear the trial. The fire will not consume you. The waters will not overtake you. The storm will not shake you, because the God who parts seas, the God who commands the sun, the God who holds the universe in His hands, is the same God who stands with you. And if God is for you, who can stand against you? This is the promise of Psalm 91:15. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. God does not watch from a distance. He steps into the fire with you. So when your faith is tested, when trials seem unending, remember this: you are not alone. The God who chose you is with you. And if you hold on, if you stand firm, your story, like Joseph's, will not end in the pit. It will end in purpose. Because when God chooses you, no trial, no betrayal, no storm can take away what He has already prepared for you. But here's the next step. What happens after God calls you? Coming to Him is the first step, but following Him requires a decision. You cannot walk with God and remain the same. When He calls you to transformation. He calls you to surrender. He calls you to something greater than yourself. If you truly want to step into His purpose, you must be willing to let go of your old ways and allow Him to refine you. Come as you are, but understand that you will not stay the same. God accepts you in your brokenness, in your struggles, and in your imperfections. But when you surrender to Him, He begins a work in you. He strips away everything that holds you back, sinful habits, destructive mindsets, and anything that keeps you from fulfilling His plan. This is why Paul urges us in Romans 12:01 to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice. It is not a partial surrender, it is a complete giving of ourselves to Him. The more you yield, the more He moves in your life. Drawing near to God will shift your desires. The closer you get to Him, the more your appetite for sin will fade. What once tempted you will lose its power. The chains that bound you will begin to break. But if your intimacy with God weakens, sin will creep back in, pulling you further away from His presence. This is why Paul declared in 1 Corinthians 15:31, I die daily. A life devoted to God is a daily surrender, a daily choice to put Him above everything else. Trials will come, but do not resist them. Many people mistake trials for punishment when in reality they are part of the refining process. Sometimes God allows discomfort because He is removing what cannot go with you into your next season. He is stripping away pride, doubt, fear, and everything that hinders your destiny. Do not fight the process. What feels like a setback is often God's way of positioning you for something greater. You may feel unprepared, but understand this. The gift inside of you is already complete. You are not waiting for God to give you what you need. He has already placed it within you. What you must do is grow into it. This is where many people get stuck. They assume they aren't ready because they think their gift needs to be developed. No, the gift is finished, but you must be stretched. You must be refined. You must step forward even when you don't feel ready, trusting that God will equip you as you go. Do not rush ahead of God and do not resist His timing. Growth takes time. Refinement takes time. But when the time comes, when you have been strengthened and positioned, what God has placed inside of you will be revealed. Likewise, when God calls us, our challenges are not signs of abandonment, but of divine preparation. Every struggle, every test, every hardship is an instrument in God's hand, refining us for His glory. Trust in His plan, endure with faith, and walk in the triumph He has already secured. You are not here by accident. The very breath in your lungs, the fire in your soul, and the restlessness in your spirit, they are all proof that God has called you for something greater. You are not just another person in the crowd, not just another name on a list. You have been chosen, set apart, and marked by God for a divine purpose that was written before the foundations of the world. But here's the truth. Knowing you are chosen is not enough. The question is, will you step into it? Will you embrace what God has already spoken over your life? Will you dare to believe that your past does not define you, your weaknesses do not disqualify you, and your struggles are not your end, but your training ground for victory? God is calling you, not because of your qualifications, but because of His power at work in you. Like David, you may have been overlooked. Like Joseph, you may have been betrayed. Like Amos, you may feel unprepared. But none of that changes what God has declared over your life. You are fearfully and wonderfully made, destined to walk in authority, to rise above every obstacle, and to live in the fullness of His purpose. This is your moment. Die to the fears, the doubts, the voices that tell you you're not enough. Take the next step, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but now. Surrender your plans, align your heart with His, and step boldly into the calling He has prepared for you. You were chosen for such a time as this. Now rise, walk in your anointing, live in your purpose, and never again doubt that you are called by the Almighty God.